Hello everyone, I'm Rick and thanks for joining me. Today we'll be looking at a new entry-level DAC. But before we get started, I'd like to ask you to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. And if you enjoy my content, please give the video a like. On to today's product, we're looking at the SMSL PS200Pro. And I'd like to thank Aoshida Audio. They did send this DAC over at no charge, so you will see the paid promo banner above. We'll be comparing the PS200Pro to the original PS200, which is my pick for 2024 best DAC under $100, as well as the SMSL D1, which as of a few months ago was my top pick for 2025 at this price point as well. In the box, we get the DAC itself, and we also get a very nice USB cable. You do have the little SMSL VMV logos etched in there, and they have a nice cotton cover over them. Great quality, it feels nice. Now let's talk specs before we take a closer look. The PS200 Pro comes in at around $86, but it's currently on sale at Aoshida for $73. And the specs are very similar to the original PS200. The DAC chip used is an ESS 9039 Q2M, an XMOS XU316 for the USB interface, which can handle up to 32-bit 768 kHz PCM and DSD to 512. 2-volt RMS output on the RCAs, with a total harmonic distortion plus noise dropping to minus 120.5 decibels, slightly better than the original PS200 at minus 118. Dynamic range and signal to noise are improved as well, 125 decibels versus 123 on the original. And I think the components on the PS200 Pro really did help to achieve this. Now let's take a closer look. On the front of the PS200 Pro, we'll see that the label says PS200 right under SMSL, and I wish they would have just put Pro for the sake of not having confusion. Now, of course, if you have an all-metal chassis, you'll know that that is the Pro version. However, they could have just wrote Pro in there as well. Over to the right side, we'll have our LED indicators, followed by a really nice button. I very much appreciate that button that has a nice tactile feel to it with a good click. It is rubberized and it feels great. Moving to the rear, from the left, we have our power and USB data port. We only have the single port. We have a little switch to change our USB audio class. We have 2.0 and 1.0. Next are digital inputs. The first a Toslink optical, the second a digital coax. Finally, our left and right analog outs on RCA. This is a single-ended DAC only. And on the PS200 Pro here, we have that text under each of the ins and out engraved. And I wish I would have just put a little bit of color on top of that to make it easier to read. On the previous version, the standard PS200, we have that writing embossed, so it pops out a little bit instead of going in, and you do get a little better visibility. However, it's still not painted, so even then it was a little tough to read. But honestly, you're probably going to be doing this once, plug it in, leave it alone. Now compared to the SMSL D1, here the D1 adds an extra USB-C port. And that's in case you're going to use your DAC plugged into a cell phone or something that can't take the DAC pulling too many amps. This way we use the bottom one for data and the top one to supply the power. One thing that I do want to note on the USB input, because a few people have mentioned it on previous posts, some people have gotten audio out of the USB from their TVs over to their DACs. With my TVs in my home, I didn't have any success. I used an OTG USB cable to connect the PS200 Pro to the USB port on my Fire TV, a Panasonic Plasma TV, an LG with 2 USB ports, both labeled USB in, a TLC Roku TV, and the USB port on a Roku Ultrabox. I tried it in USB audio class 1 and class 2 with no luck. So if you can get USB audio out of your TV over to a DAC, please let the audience know what model TV you've had success with. I think that would be helpful, and thanks in advance. Now let's go back to the front to compare these three DACs' build quality. On the left here, we have our new PS200 Pro, an all aluminum body all the way around. Super nice. It feels quite a bit better than the previous PS200, which has a plastic body. It also has this plastic front part, which I believe is acrylic because it does scratch rather easily. This one does have a plastic button as well, although it does feel nice. One added feature that the older PS200 has that the PS200 Pro does not is Bluetooth. Now looking at the D1, I will say that the downside to that D1 in my opinion is its touchscreen. It is fairly weak. It's slow to respond. Once you have it set, you don't have to worry about it. However, I do prefer the tactile button on the PS200 Pro. Now, supplying power to all three of these DACs, you'll see that the only one that has a light on when the unit is plugged in is going to be the D100. We see a little red LED. I'll go ahead and power everything on. And we see that both the PS200 and the PS200 Pro do blink until we get a signal. On both the PS200 and PS200 Pro, we simply hit the button to cycle through our inputs. And on the D1, we have to give it a gentle tap. It is more sensitive to your finger press. So build quality, the PS200 Pro, much nicer than the PS200 and about the same as the D1. However, I do prefer the matte finish here because on the D1, you do catch fingerprints a little more so. And the final thing about aesthetics here is going to be those LEDs. I don't know how well this comes out on video. However, the PS200s as well as the D1's LEDs are quite a bit dimmer. The 200 Pros are quite a bit brighter. I do wish they were a little dimmer because with the lights off, they are brighter than I would like. However, I can fix this with a little bit of electric tape. Taking a peek inside, here I have the original PS200 on the left side and the PS200 Pro over on the right. The first thing that catches my eye is the internal Bluetooth antenna on the PS200 down here. And it can be internal because the PS200's case is plastic. Now you all know I'm no electrical engineer, but maybe removing this antenna does something to help bring the noise levels down. The next thing that I notice is the Pro gets presumably lower ESR caps here over on the power input side, aluminum polymers versus the standard liquid or wet electrolytics over on the original. It looks like we have the same input controller here. Here are the XMOS chips and the DAC chips. Zooming in though, here is what I would assume gives this DAC its flavor. On the PS200, we have OPA 1656 op amps, while the Pro gets OPA 1612As, which are a newer, higher performance version of the 1612s and slightly quieter. It's really amazing to see how these incremental improvements lead to better sound quality. And how does the PS200 Pro sound? I tested the PS200 Pro and compared it with the others connected to my Jungsan JA1 preamp with Burson V7 Classic op amps, over to a pair of Orchard Audio Stark Crimson Mono Ultra Premium LPSs at $7,000 for the pair. Those are insane. Then over to my custom Joseph Crow bass speakers. Now for headphone listening, I went from a Mac over to the DACs to a Aoun N7 Class A headphone amp. This guy right here, review to come, another awesome piece. And from there, I stuck with the Fosse Audio IM4 IEMs to keep things simple. Well, the PS200 Pro compared to the original PS200, the Pro sounds tonally very similar to the original, but it does project the sound a little less forward and it does sound a touch more natural. The same great clarity and sharpness, but the highs are slightly more tamed with the 200 Pro, although I would definitely not call them rolled off. The bass is also slightly deeper and tighter with the Pro, but I still wouldn't call it warm. The Pro for sure still retains that ESS flavor, and it gives you that kind of studio vibe. Very crisp and detailed, just slightly more believable than the original PS200. Now, would I upgrade to the Pro if I had the original? I don't think so. I think I'd wait for another generation or two before spending the money here. However, if you already have one and want another one for another room, then I definitely recommend skip the original and go for a Pro, and maybe use a Pro for your main listening and have that original for a second room. Now the PS200 Pro versus the D1. The D1 does use a Roon DAC chip, and here we're at the classic dilemma of chocolate versus vanilla. These two are equally wonderful at this price point. They're just two different flavors. The PS200 Pro bringing that more precise and analytical sound, and the D1 trading off some accuracy in the bass for a more spacious and holographic sound. And honestly, I couldn't pick one to recommend over the other without knowing the person's taste. If you followed my channel for any time, you'll know that I really prefer a more spacious presentation, and I am willing to sacrifice a little bit of detail to get that. So for myself, if I were to purchase one of these two, I would personally go for the less technically superior D1 for that flavor. However, my friend Rafael, who's joined me in previous videos, told me that he really does love the sound of the PS200 Pro and he prefers the more detailed sound. Now Raph is in his late 30s, and I'm about 12 years older than he is. But I do find this true in my circle. Younger people do tend to be more impressed with that detail. And for a DAC under $100, I think the PS200 definitely delivers that, and I can totally recommend it. And that's all I have for this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.